We've heard strong rumours of a Nintendo Switch revision in 2021 that could feature significant enhancements such as 4K HDR, DLSS, increased CPU and GPU clock speeds. It all seems a little hard to imagine. Nintendo have never been one to conform to industry standards. Since the earliest Game Boy, the message has always been, forget cutting edge, focus on simplicity in design. Offer a compelling user experience and of course, some amazing games. Nintendo has always executed on that vision. The Game Boy was cheap, with parts that go back to the late 70s, but it revolutionized the industry. The Nintendo Switch is no different, continuing to dominate sales and smash records. It's on track to surpass the Wii, and many first-party games have sold staggering amounts of units. So why then would Nintendo disturb the landscape and bring out new hardware? Is it pressure from next-generation consoles from Sony and Microsoft? Highly unlikely. The reason simply is timing. We are approaching the Switch's 4th year, and we are past the halfway point. Games are becoming more ambitious, studios are getting more comfortable with the hardware, but with that in mind, game development is becoming a lot more difficult. The Switch current specifications are rigid, underpowered, and underclocked to promote the hybrid console vision. Power draw, heat, and battery life are the main focus, yet there is overhead to push the hardware further, to even push games to run at 60 FPS on current hardware, with some overclocking and modifications. It's clear that Nintendo will bring us something next year, and speculation is high about what it could be. So why then do we need a Nintendo Switch revision, or a Switch Pro as it's been called? Simply because many games that have been released in 2020 are struggling to hold frame rates, and the best example has to be Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Released on November 20th, it's a terrific game that has been praised by critics and fans alike, but the Musou game has also drawn concerns about its performance. The frame rate is poor at times, targeting 30 frames per second. It never locks at 30, averaging closer to 23 to 25, and sometimes dropping into the teens, where there is much action on the screen. This is simply a CPU and memory bandwidth bottleneck. Running docked at stock clocks, we can see the frame rate dipping regularly. However, if we overclock the CPU to the potential maximum of the Nintendo Switch, we can see that the frame rate does smooth out at 30 FPS. In 2020, this poor performance really isn't acceptable anymore. While many users don't notice, many also do, and frame rates like this can have an impact on playability and enjoyment. Simply put, the higher the FPS, the snappier the gameplay feels. But frame rate is only one piece of the pie. The other issue is resolution. To compensate for poor frame rates, the Nintendo Switch has a feature known as dynamic resolution. But once again, if we take Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity as the test case, the resolution can drop as low as 380p in handheld mode. In 2020, once again, this isn't really an acceptable level of performance. I mentioned earlier that the Switch hardware is underpowered and underclocked to compensate for the hybrid approach, but there are ways to improve performance and get a taste of what the future may hold. Simply put, with a modified Switch and some overclocking, we are able to push many games to approach 60 frames per second. We already saw something like this with The Witcher 3 that was released last year, and although The Witcher 3 is considered one of the impossible ports for the Switch, 60 frames per second patches is not as uncommon as you would think. The Switch does have enough overhead to make games hit that magical 60 FPS figure. With all this in mind, there's been some really impressive work done by the Switch community to bring out some 60 FPS patches to some games that I want to demonstrate, and this will show us that The Witcher 3 was not a fluke or a one-off exception to the rule. The Switch does indeed have enough power and overhead to hit 60 FPS in many games. And what the main takeaway here is that Nintendo would not need to significantly increase hardware specifications for the rumored Switch revision. Most of these patches have been designed to uncap the frame rate, and then with some overclocking, push performance to hit 60 FPS. However, in some cases, this is simply not possible, so resolution must be lowered. Dark Souls Remastered, released in October of 2018 for the Switch, was ported by Virtuos. The game targets 30 FPS and runs well at that rate for the most part. But thanks to a 60 FPS patch by GBA temp developer Masagrata, we can simply unlock the frame rate and apply a moderate overclock of the CPU from 1 GHz to 1.2 GHz, which is enough to push the game to hit 60 FPS. This is quite impressive stuff. Next up is Grid Autosport by Codemasters. The game is considered the best racing sim on the Switch, and who am I to argue, it looks great. It already features a performance mode that uncaps the frame rate. However, quality mode is capped at 30 FPS. Once again, with a patch by Masagrata, it unlocks 60 FPS in all modes, and with some overclocking, can hit that magical frame rate. Another title that I tested was Crash Team Racing. This one received a 60 FPS patch as well. It's exclusively for handheld mode. We mentioned earlier that memory bandwidth is probably the major bottleneck when it comes to dock performance increases, so overclocking isn't always the magic bullet that we've been looking for, as the memory clocks themselves cannot be pushed beyond 1.6 GHz. However, in handheld mode, the game runs silky smooth with a 60 FPS patch added. Monster Hunter Generations is also another title that can take advantage of overclocking and a 60 FPS patch. The stock game runs at 30, but with some clever reverse engineering once again by Masagrata and patching out the 30 FPS lock in the game, with a moderate overclock, we can see once again utilizing boosted clocks of the Switch to push the frame rate up to the magical 60 FPS number. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is another title that has lots of work done to it. Here is a 60 FPS patch for handheld mode. This one, however, requires the 1.11 update exclusively, and since I'm running 1.12, there was no simple way for me to revert back and run this patch myself. But as you can see, running on handheld mode makes Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition look absolutely incredible. But this is only a small example. There are many other games that have similar patches to bring the games up to 60 FPS. Out of the box, a memory bandwidth increase alone would offer improvements. But if I was to accurately predict, I would expect to see a 15 to 20% boost in CPU, GPU, and memory clocks. This would be enough to take the Switch to another revision higher and push those resolutions and frame rates a level higher than what it currently is. If you ask developers what they would like to see in a Switch revision, I think the universal response would be more memory. I personally don't expect any earth-shattering improvements. We've heard rumors about Nintendo asking developers to get games 4K ready, but this could be interpreted in many different ways. Right now, many games have upper resolution limits. For example, Doom 2016 on the Switch cannot run beyond 720p, no matter how high I push clocks. There is an upper limit on resolution that conforms to the current Nintendo Switch's SDK, and with that in mind, I don't believe that Nintendo is suggesting that 4K gaming is coming to their system, at least not next year. Rather, they are likely requesting developers relax resolution restrictions and offer performance modes in their games so that they can appropriately scale to what comes next. I do think that the Switch revision will be an improvement, but the target audience will appeal to those users who currently aren't pleased with either performance or visuals, especially in handheld mode. For most users who love the Switch and don't have any concerns about the way it looks and the way it plays, I think the current Switch still has many good years left in it. But it's fascinating to take a look at 60 FPS patches for current Switch titles. The hardware is capable, no question, and hopefully we will see Nintendo open up more hardware for developers to take advantage of when we see the rumoured Switch Pro release in 2021. So there you have it, a taste of some 60 FPS patches currently for the Nintendo Switch that I think will give us a glimpse into the future and what we can expect going into next year with the rumored Switch revision or the Switch Pro, whatever you guys call it. And I definitely think this is an interesting topic because I think Nintendo next year will have probably one of their biggest years for a long time. We expect to see new hardware as well as a influx of new first-party games that are being announced as well. But let me know what you thought about this in the comments below. What do you think about the 60 FPS patches that you've seen for the Switch? Do you think that the Switch revision will feature something more or less than what we've seen today? I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. But for now, we are going to leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this episode, leave me a thumbs up and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.